Today we have a very important innovation and also a very important topic. We are very lucky to have with us Mathew Varghese, a very senior retired United Nations officer. He's already talked about the issues of interest to him, which is the changes in how international agreements and international governance is weakening these days. We will have a link to his video in the information box, and we have several commentators to discuss it. So today it's a discussion. We have three senior people, we have two young people, and one more young person said she would join. Let's see when she joins. Okay, but in the meantime, let's get started. The first to speak is my college classmate and retired senior government officer, Brijeshwar Singh. So Brij, over to you.
Thanks, Subodh, and let me welcome Mathew, Varghese, and all our colleagues for this discussion. I hope it's very lively. First, my great thanks to Mathew Varghese, because it's difficult sometimes to comprehend the enormous amount of good work the United Nations does, despite all the criticism that is levied against it. But he has really raised the very important issue of governance of international agreements. And this is a debate which goes right back a century to the founding of the League of Nations, where there was always this question, will an international body have the ability to compel like a sovereign? I mean, can they use any kind of compulsion in enforcing an international agreement? Can there be any kind of international sovereignty ascribed to any of these international bodies? Well, the United Nations was not set up on that principle. It was based on the principle of national sovereignty. And the bodies which did have binding agreements were largely technical in nature, like the World Meteorological Organization or WTO or something. And these were, and of course, the scientific bodies like FAO and WHO. So you had two tracks of the United Nations, I think two orbits. One was a very politically oriented kind of Security Council, General Assembly, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And these issues were ones which were, or peacekeeping, which is very much a political thing. And you had technical kind of issues, again, with a kind of hierarchy, because where industrial issues were involved, these bodies remained very much in the grip of the large donors. And we found that even in the technical issues, he who paid the piper called the tune. I mean, if you look at ICAO or the Climate Change Secretariat, they were very much dominated by Western countries who were also footing the bill. Things which weren't so important, like UNEP, were headquartered in Nairobi or in the Third World. But the organizations which really mattered, like FAO or WHO or ICAO, which governed civil aviation, were very, very much headquartered in the Western world. So you always had this kind of political dominance by a group of nations within the United Nations. It was written that way, but it remains a very big issue, because where does national sovereignty come in? Now, for example, the IMF has binding conditions in its loan agreements. So these are really financial contracts, which are honored by international law. And the question is, are these merely loan agreements? Are these merely financial agreements? Or are they pushing a political line? So this has been an issue with the United Nations right from the beginning. The other issue is, of course, the very limited funds the United Nations has to accomplish these enormous tasks it's been given. I mean, an organization like UNDP, which has such a wide remit, has never really had enough money to make more than a very marginal difference. So I think there has been a sort of inner garden of the United Nations, which has been very much politically dominated by Western countries, and an outer garden of things which don't matter so much. So this is the way I see it. But this issue of sovereignty, I think, is very, very important, though Mathew calls it governance, international governance. And I think the only organization which has tried to move in that direction is the European Commission. The European Union was founded on the principle of ever closer union. And when the Brits found that this was contrary to their beloved monarchy and their beloved national sovereignty, they actually exited, which was, a blow for the concept of an overriding kind of European sovereignty in the Commission. and an achievement for the British politicians who wanted to reassert national sovereignty. So it's not that national sovereignty versus some kind of international sovereignty isn't an issue in the West. It's certainly an issue in Europe. And Brexit was an example of that, I thought. So I think these are some of the issues which come up when we think about the United Nations. And I'm really looking forward to what our younger colleagues have to say about on the subject. For me, the political and financial domination of the United Nations is the big issue. The system permits it. It's been designed to permit it. Maybe in the 21st century, these things will be thought through. But we'd certainly like to hear from Mathew what his views are on it, as well as from our other colleagues. So over to you, Subodh.
Well, I'm not going to speak. It's Mathew to decide whether he wants to respond to Bridge now or later. But Mathew, it's your call whether you want to respond now or later.
Later.
Okay, good. All right. So thanks, Bridge. As always, quite broad. Let's go to Rahul.
Namaskar. I'm Rahul Sinha. Currently, I'm pursuing my master's in economics from Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Kolkata. First of all, I would like to mention that I am delighted to be back on Dr. Mathur's channel, and I'm really excited to share the screen with eminent figures from the realms of policymaking and global governance, along with some of my peers from academia. So, Matthew's presentation was truly captivating and thought-provoking. After delving into the session and conducting some of my own research on the topic, I have developed a personal perspective that I would like to share today. The objectives, points, and the arguments will primarily revolve around the contrasts between globalization and national self-interest. In doing so, I would like to shed some light on the fact that recent geopolitical events and health crises have further emphasized the relevance of globalization, showcasing how it continues to play a crucial role despite of significant challenges. Yeah. So there has been global collaboration in vaccine development. So the initiative like COVAX demonstrated global cooperation in addressing COVID-19 pandemic, emphasizing the importance of equitable vaccine access despite geopolitical tensions. Digital connectivity for remote work and education was a thing. Resilient international trade amid geopolitical tensions, and there was climate change mitigation and international agreements as well. As of October 2023, the COVAX initiative had distributed over 1.8 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses to 140 plus nations, demonstrating the successful global collaboration. During the peak of the pandemic, remote work surged to nearly 40%, emphasizing the importance of digital connectivity. Despite geopolitical tensions, global merchandise trade expanded by 8% in 2022. And additionally, 197 parties have ratified the Paris Agreement, showcasing a collective commitment to addressing the climate change. Now, if we look at the broader picture, the intertwining of globalization and national self-interest is evident in various aspects. So there are trade agreements and economic benefits, foreign direct investments and market access, global security and defense alliances, and most importantly, energy cooperation and resource access. So having said this, maintaining common global economic standards in the current landscape characterized by persistent inequality and geopolitical turmoil presents several challenges, reflecting the complexities and intricacies of globalization's evolution. Several key factors contribute to the difficulties encountered in upholding uniform global economic standards. So basically, I was motivated to study this facet after looking into the Atlantic influenced concept of environmental social governance. If I were to talk about the Asia Pacific group of nations, while there are nations that are eyeing to achieve so-called luxurious sustainable development goals like clean climate and energy, there are countries that even fail to provide nutritional food to its citizens on a regular basis. The magnitude of inequality is massive. So a common goal-oriented objective list won't make much sense in this case. So, like Mathew mentioned during his speech, the SDGs are already on life support. So I think this is one of the key factors that have caused this situation. There are diverse socio-economic contexts and priorities, geopolitical rivalries and conflicting agendas, resistance to change and protectionist measures, and limited multilateral cooperation and coordination. As of 2022, approximately 700 million people worldwide still live in extreme poverty, underscoring the persistent challenges linked to global economic inequality. Trade tensions between major economies like US and China have led to the increase of protectionist measures. Uh, the average tariff rate, for example, for the industrial countries rose to 5.2% in 2021, reflecting the impact of protectionist policies. The complexity of global supply chains has further complicated the regulation of international trade. According to UNCTAD, exacerbating the difficulties in establishing common global economic standards. The Global Competitiveness Report by the World Economic Forum also highlights the disparities in the global competitiveness, particularly for developing countries grappling with institutional weakness and inadequate infrastructure, amplifying the challenges of promoting uniform global economic standards amid prevailing inequality and geopolitical turbulence. For particularly for localization, however, I hold a different perspective than that Mathew talked about. So, as far as I understand, localization is a form of globalization, which refers to the adaptation of global products, services, and technologies to suit local preferences, languages, and, for instance, cultural contexts. From India's perspective, the concept of localization within the framework of globalization has gained prominence in recent years, driven by the government's emphasis on initiatives such as Make in India and Digital India. This approach aims to foster indigenous manufacturing, innovation, and digital transformation while simultaneously integrating with the global economy. We have noticed a significant amount of manufacturing sector growth throughout the years. There has been digital transformation and localized technologies. There has been promotion of indigenous innovations and startups, and most importantly, cultural preservation and promotion. So, ancillary factories and MSMEs play a crucial role in India's pursuit of localization within the framework of globalization. They contribute significantly to the country's economic growth, the employment generation, and the technological advancement as well. According to the Ministry of MSMEs, MSMEs do contribute to around 29% in the country's GDP and employ over 110 million people, which is really a big deal for us. And ancillary factories, also closely linked with large manufacturing units, support the localization efforts by providing specialized components and services, thereby strengthening the domestic supply chain. Furthermore, initiatives such as Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign have prioritized the development of MSMEs, fostering their integration into global value chains and encouraging local innovation and production. In conclusion, I would just like to say that the contemporary global landscape really reflects a complex interplay between globalization and national self-interest, characterized by a delicate balance between global cooperation and individualistic aspiration. Recent geopolitical scenario and health crisis have highlighted the continued relevance of globalization in addressing multifaceted challenges, while simultaneously highlighting the need for tailored solutions that respect diverse socioeconomic contexts and priorities. To finish with, localized strategies, as exemplified by India's initiatives, do offer a nuanced approach to leverage the benefits of globalization while preserving cultural identity and fostering indigenous development. It is imperative for nations to navigate these intricate dynamics to foster inclusive and sustainable global growth, recognizing the importance of collaborative efforts and adaptive strategies to navigate an increasingly interconnected world. So, I thank you for your time. That is all I had to say as of now.
Okay, so Mathew, you want to respond now or later? You are on mute, Mathew. Yeah.
Sorry, I will do it later. I'll take it all together.
Okay, fine. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, Rahul. You really prepared quite a bit. You put in quite a lot of effort. And it's very, very heartening to hear an MA final student talking like this. I wish I had been able to talk like this when I was an MA final student.
Quite right.
My colleagues are grinning because they know that we were just lafangas. We were quite incapable of any such detailed analysis. So it's really a matter of pride to see that young people like you are able to formulate an opinion and articulate it. We have with us now Shubhangi Goel also, but I think the turn is Nandini's. So Nandini, please go ahead.
Hello to everybody present. I'm Nandini. I'm a first year student at IIT Kolkata. And I'm honored to be here at this, joined by this panel discussion today. And I thank you again, Subhash Mathur sir, to invite me to your discussion session again. And since it's not every day that we get to talk to someone such as Mathew, so I know that you said that you would like to take all the questions in the end, but after much research and reading, I realized I have more questions than opinions on the matters that you spoke about. So if it's okay with you, I would like to take this opportunity to have sort of a conversational discussion with you to utilize my turn with this, if that's okay with you. Right. So I have very brief questions about the presentation that you had. Most of the points I wholeheartedly agree with. And it was really interesting to hear your perspective, since we are on the other side of the table and we know very little about what goes on about these decisions, how they are taken, and what's actually going on within the nations. So my first question would be about so when you spoke about how far nations are on track to achieve the SDG goals, the main flow of the discussion was about how national interests don't really match with the global interests. And we are not alien to the fact that a country's internal conflict can wreak havoc. This indeed is perhaps one of the most important factors contributing to the lack of progress in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So an interesting line that caught my attention, which Rahul also mentioned, was when you said how some nations are on life support with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I wanted to ask you that what exactly do you refer to when you say on life support? And does that refer to some cultural or social conflicts, or is it about the economic conflicts? And does it refer to the fact that the contribution of non-state actors within certain nations, which does this force these nations to be on life support, or how do you view this problem?
So Mathew, if you want, you can answer now, or we can still follow your procedure and wait till everybody is finished.
While the questions are fantastic, I would like to wait because I'm taking notes. I will not be able to answer all the questions and all the issues, but I will take them, at least the most important ones, one by one, but I'm taking notes.
Okay, great. All right. So Nandini, please ask your questions.
Okay.
Shoot them.
All right.
Shoot them.
Okay, so going ahead with my next question. So while listening to your discussion further, I also wanted to ask you about your statement with when you said there's a silent crisis unfolding beneath the visible crisis. So to ask you on those lines, whenever we see there's a war unfolding in front of our eyes, we face a massive setback in achieving a majority of these Sustainable Development Goals. So whether we look at it from a climate perspective, where wars are causing unsurmountable detriments to the environment, or from the perspective of eliminating world hunger and poverty, when several nations set these goals many years back, we were already working on rebuilding ourselves globally and recovering from the damages that were caused in the past. And to some extent, I believe that, and which is the general worldview, I also think that these new conflicts and these wars and these global pandemics, they set us back a few years of progress, right? So I wanted to ask, how does UN perceive this conflict as an organization? And if I take the SDG as an example, so when these goals were set, was there a certain contingency plan or a buffer period that was allowed, or that was, some relaxation that was given in case of unforeseen events and calamities such as these? That would be my second question. And lastly, my question was regarding globalization. So as we know, globalization and trade are essential for every country, which we always study through and through, and we always see in front of our eyes how nations trade and they grow. And even though the poorer nations have become less poor after the introduction of globalization, we can also see a sort of a codependency emerging between certain nations in terms of trade. And more often than not, these are the less developed nations being dependent on the more developed nations. So, as you mentioned during your talk, despite the conflict, trade between India and China was at an all-time high, and imports from China grew by 21% last year. So even in the light of such conflicts, we see a tremendous growth in imports. So can we not say that such cross-border conflicts between India and China have had little impact on the trade activities concerning these two nations? So is trade dependency a major reason for this? And if yes, then what can we say about this? Can we say that this is a negative effect of globalization, as in when countries become dependent upon each other, especially the less developed countries who should be focusing on becoming more independent than being dependent on certain developed countries? So yes, that's my last question. And that's all the questions that I had formed, and I enjoyed your discussion throughout. And I would look forward to you for answering my questions. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Unmuted. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Nandini. Well, we'll wait for Mathew. We have with us Shubhangi Goel. Shubhangi, please introduce yourself, and then let's hear from you.
Am I audible to everybody?
Yeah, good. Little low, the volume is a bit low, but go ahead.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. I am Shubhangi Goel, currently pursuing my post-graduation from ISPR Bangalore. And before this, I have done my undergraduation from Delhi University in BCom. And apart from that, I have like several skills related to soft skills and technical skills, and
You are now on mute.
I think she's trying to repair.
Yeah, okay. We can.
Subhash, I suggest you go to the next speaker and call
okay.
her back.
Fine. Shubhangi, we'll wait for you. TCA, you please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. And hello, everybody. You have raised, Mathew, a question like Bridge said, which has been with us for a very long time. And to my mind, what you are discussing are the symptoms of a huge underlying problem, which has several dimensions to it, but it's all the same problem, basically. To my mind, the best way to look at it is, why don't human beings or groups of human beings or small groups of human beings or very large groups of human beings, why don't they cooperate for a longish period of time? They cooperate over very limited objectives for limited periods of time. But over a long period of time, they don't cooperate. And all efforts at this kind of thing comes apart. So since I do keep in touch with this kind of discussion because of my profession, I always find that these discussions lack a kind of, I don't want to use such a pompous term, but an intellectual framework within which to hang the whole discussion on. And the sad part of it is that it is actually that framework is available to us. And it has been since John Nash did that whole thing about, Nash equilibrium and stuff like that. It was all about cooperation. And the question was that you will have that kind of an equilibrium where nobody has any incentive to change their particular strategies. So the real question is, why do countries, in the context of what you've said, why do countries choose to change their strategies? And to that, we don't have any good answers. We can come up with a number of hypotheses. The most sort of prominent one of which these days is the emergence of strongmen, Xi Jinping or Erdogan or whoever, all of whom want to assert themselves in their regions in some manner, which essentially defies the kind of rules that the countries have agreed on to conduct their affairs vis-a-vis other countries. So that's one problem. Why do these countries choose to change their strategies? And obviously, when one country changes its strategies, all the others follow suit in different degrees. And China is framing the problem as saying that why should America frame the rules or why should the West frame the rules? That's one way of doing it. So, I mean, that's one set of issues that needs fuller discussion. The other thing is much more practical or whatever, reality. I don't rightly remember how many countries there were in 1945 when the UN was formed, maybe 40 or 45 countries. Today there are 190. So that's one thing that we have to bear in mind. It makes cooperation that much more difficult. The other thing is that in 1945, world population was about 1.2 billion. In 1900, it was 1 billion, and then a whole lot of chaps died in the First and Second World Wars. So it was about 1.2 billion. In today's, I think, around 8 billion, give or take a few hundred million this side or that side. So the system is catering to a lot of different aspirations, you might call it, or objective functions, or whatever you want to call it. Essentially, the problem of cooperation has become that much more difficult because there are more people and more countries. And essentially different kind of leaderships that you have in these countries. So given that, any kind of international action which requires everybody to march in step is going to be very difficult. And I think climate change is one thing, trade practices, that's another thing. WTO worked as long as China chose not to break the rules, and so on. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about this problem of countries choosing to change their strategies for reasons that are not entirely rational. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, TCA. As always, very helpful. So Subhash, please.
Okay, I'm Subhash Mathur. I'm a retired officer from Indian Revenue Service, Customs and Excise. Frankly speaking, I have no business to be in this intellectual collection of people who are talking from various points of view. So I'm a little, whatever little education that I had only allows me to speak about some of the issues which I don't understand. And perhaps I always wonder why such things are happening all the time. And yet the world has no solution to these issues. And one of the factors which I notice is that the UN's importance in world politics has gone down substantially. Trump wanted to completely walk out of United Nations as a useless debating forum. And yet United Nations continues to do a few things well, but marginally, peripherally. They don't impact the real politics of the world. People come there for the General Assembly, make a lovely speech and go away. How does it matter? It doesn't matter to anybody what a president of a country has come and spoken in General Assembly this year or past year or the past 10 years. None. None matters. Yet the General Assembly goes in September in a mode of people talking. But when it comes to Security Council, nothing ever gets done. And I think the downfall started from 2013 or something like that, when the Iraq war, war on terror happened. United Nations simply said, we are the United Nations, you are either with us or you are against us. So join with the men and material, or leave it. And then we'll deal with you. So every nation fell in line. And we had the war on terror, and everyone knows the consequences of the war on terror. But yet, the United Nations also approved it, finally, because Americans were clever enough to go to United Nations, get an approval. So it became a world body campaign. But it diminished the role of United Nations completely. It never discussed this in any assembly or any sessions. They simply accepted the American positions and everyone who had fallen for it. And I feel that single act has changed the nature of conferences in the world. The nations have realized that there is no point in going to a United Nations, a large body of 190 plus people, and just talking and coming back. And I think the growth of multilateral organizations and efforts began to bloom from there. We had, in India this year, for example, we had several multilateral conferences being held, and people were just coming, some VIP or the other was just coming and going. Not that these conferences always make an impact on the world, but sometimes they help in easing the issues between the nations. Sometimes better trade facilities are made. Sometimes trade barriers are lowered. But the world, in my opinion, has moved away from United Nations to a more closer group of people who are willing to cooperate and help each other. Although Rahul has very aptly talked about vaccine and cooperation and all that, but that was no choice. Either you cooperated or you were doomed. It was no choice. Same with climate. Climate changes, either accept the climate change or get lost. And still the debate goes on, who is the bigger polluter and why should I contribute? To hell, I was a big polluter earlier. I smashed the world. Why should I pay for it? And it's happening right there in our, before our eyes. And I was reading somewhere that wars between people, let's say people to people, nation to nation, groups to groups, have essentially grown much bigger than they were, say, let us say 30 years ago. So if they were 30 years ago, there were 50 conflicts going on, let's not call them wars. And they have grown to maybe 70, maybe even 80. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I did read this. And it is surprising that with all these so-called world cooperation, globalization, internationalism, yet, frankly speaking, to me, nothing seems to be working. And there's a lot of one-upmanship is going on in the world. That I made more vaccines, I sent more vaccines, I'm supplying the food to the world, and I will stop that food supply. Russia says, I will not allow the ships to move with the grains. Where do you see cooperation? I don't. Israel says, I will flatbed the Hamas population also, irrespective, civilians also. And nobody says, why have you done it? In fact, people are cheering it, that they have done it. All against, it is again a war against globalization, against United Nations or whatever you call it. It's a war on terror. So therefore, sometimes I feel the war on terror has gone on in terms which should not be palatable to a sane world. And I feel now that nationalistic tendencies are overriding our international commitments. We see that national interest is much more important than any global interest of any kind, whether it is food, whether it is lives, whether it is development, whatever it may be. And therefore, I don't see a very healthy trend. You talk about SDGs and all that, but where are they? Where are they in terms of goals? For example, India has a PBS system, and over and above that, we feed 80 crore people every month. Free food, free ration. That means almost 70% of the Indian population is without jobs, without earnings, without incomes, and whatever you may talk about MSMEs and number of people being employed, but I don't see that. And locally, let me see in Jaipur, I see people every day walking in as a migrant to Jaipur from nearby villages because they don't want to work on farming. They have a degree. You have taught them a degree, which is a sort of a BA general pass degree, which gives you no jobs, nothing. You can't even get a clerk's job with a BA degree at your command. So what do? They come to Jaipur and become chowkidars, guards, which is the lowest salary. And how do they get a house? They don't live in a house. They live from job to job. 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock, one job, 8 o'clock to 8 p.m. दूसरी job. They don't go home. They have no home. They can't find a home. And they can't find toilets. So they use the toilets of the place where they work. So what kind of a world we are seeing? I don't know, first, frankly speaking. And talking about even high rise. We produce 15 lakh engineering students every year. And less than 2 lakhs people get employment for which they have been trained for. The rest, they are underemployed, unemployed or underemployed. We don't know what happens to them. When I raised this issue in a forum, I was told, oh, those are private colleges, are useless. Then why are we setting up those private useless colleges? Tell me why. For God's sake, why are we setting up those useless engineering colleges in private sector? And we are approving them. UGC is approving them every year. Certification given every 3 years. Yet we are proud that we produce 15 lakh engineers. That's all that matters. And to end, I think I have gone on too long. Nandini, the issue why China, we are importing from China is because we need what China makes. And why we are not exporting to China is because we don't make anything which China makes, frankly speaking. I mean, there is no other explanation. I have tried to read on this a lot, but finally I come to the conclusion, even though there is war going on between India and China today, Indian government is going after Chinese apps and intelligence and everything, and saying that you like China is like saying that you like Pakistan. Yet, trade is growing only because the kind of stuff which China makes is what India wants. And there is no other way of getting it. For example, pharma. Pharma kind of thing we can't get from anywhere. You can't go to America and say, give us your pharma. You will be drained out in 2 days. So therefore, I see a lot of contradictions, but I see a lessening of influence or of United Nations. I don't find any international globalization, and I don't find any international what you call internationalization of nations in their way to take the world to a better world to live in than what we have lived in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are done with the discussants. It's time for Mathew, and then have an open discussion, which would be unregulated. Okay. The initial discussant speech was by order, but now Mathew responds and it's all open. Okay. Mathew, please.
Thank you, Subodh.
But before that,
Subodh,
Mathew, let me say one thing, that the experiment of including young people, which is certainly an experiment, I am saying it has worked. Okay. Today's young people have proved that they can sit with us seniors and they can add to it. So thank you for making my crazy idea work. It's really something to note that it hardly ever happens, that there are so many senior people and equal time is given to junior people, assured equal time, and they use it so wisely. I hope other people also replicate it, because it's not a good idea for juniors to talk to juniors, seniors to talk to seniors. At least we can have this cross-generational dialogue within our own community. So thank you for this, and let's go to Mathew.
Thank you, Subodh. Wonderful discussion. Thank you also, Subodh, for giving me an idea about how the panel is. You said they're very smart, very bright. I'd say they are much better than that. After listening to a diverse set of ideas that have provoked from the topic I was speaking about. One of the things that I like to say is that, and which I said before, was that we are living in a divided world, divided countries. Because of the extreme positions that countries are actually taking. On the divided world, the thing is that when countries take extreme positions inside their own countries, how does it actually affect these countries? Sweden and Netherlands are two countries where you don't see excessive political divide. And those countries have actually seen inequality and the public policy better made to handle what is actually happened. Sweden and Netherlands are examples. However, in the case of India, we said there is a cost to a divided world. There's a cost to sectarianism. And the benefits of growth has basically gone to the richer people, while the poor have stayed the same or declined despite the growth India has been witnessing. So there's a cost. The US is the same. There was a massive expansion during COVID, after COVID, in terms of GDP growth. And those who actually benefited were the top 10%. The bottom 50%, actually their income declined during the same period. China feels the inequalities, and they know, the policymakers know there is inequalities, but that inequality is not as great as you would witness in India or inside the US. There is inequality. I'm not saying there is no inequality. So there is a cost that we need to pay in terms of having a divided world. And that's something that the political polarization brings about, and which I really want to stress. And some of this political polarization is brought into the global scene. Your brother talked about look at COVID, look at climate. We didn't have a choice but to collaborate. But I don't see the level of cooperation that is necessary for climate change. While we were just waiting for you to come, Subodh, we were talking about the extreme pollution in Gurgaon.
Yeah.
the one Brijesh, I think, who said that it's local, most of the pollution. Yes, it is local. But should this local pollution go on a global scale, but many locals making this pollution, there needs to be a way of handling this. And how do we handle gases that are that we use in refrigerators across the world? There has to be some form of agreement. I want to give you an example that I sometimes use to show how we use the same intelligence and judgment that we use inside our household, inside with our friends, to everything else that's solutions. A few years back, somebody robbed a bank in the US. This is a true story. But the police was very surprised that he did not wear a mask when he went to rob the local bank. And everybody recognized him in the cameras. So the police asked him, why did you not wear a mask? Because he was caught within an hour where he had taken the money and gone home. And he said that he had read somewhere that if you put lime juice on your face, the cameras do not capture you. Okay? So to test that idea, he brought a Polaroid, took a photograph of himself, and the Polaroid came out black, or he could not see. And me and my wife was arguing what exactly happened to the Polaroid. I was saying, if you put lime juice on your eyes, you can't see anything because your eyes will burn. And she was saying that the Polaroid was defective. Whatever happens is that you bring the same level of attitude, character, and intelligence to other problems. So the divisions that is within nations, you bring it to the same attitude and issues to the global issues as well, because you continue with the extreme, views that you actually hold. Even these are democracies, you elect these extreme politicians in many ways. So those divisions continue to dissolve. On the relevance of the UN, and I said in this, which was Brijesh's point, the issue is that if you are fighting inside your country, then you would reduce the relevance in the global side. And that is quite true. And it's the same with Subhash's point about is the UN that important? What I am saying is that can anybody else, without intergovernmental agreements, handle climate change across the world? If you are supposed to export wheat, where does the agreement comes in about what is the pesticides that you can use and what is the quality of wheat, etc., the international norms. So there is a place where these things need to be agreed because no country can live in isolation by itself. COVAX, which was an example given by Rohit, yes, but it was not an ideal agreement. It helped because everybody wanted the COVID to be managed, but the agreement, they would not share those patents which was necessary to be shared. It was not an ideal. So those things are continues to be perpetuated without actually finding solutions. The Nandini's point, did I get your name right, Nandini? Point about SDGs on life support. Are we rebuilding ourselves, etc.? How does UN see these problems and the contingencies? Let me put it simply this way. The UN is a forum where the nations would come together and agree this is an issue that we need to handle it. Unless we agree that there is a problem and that we agree that we need to work together to find the solution, nobody else can help. This is something that the nations have to agree with themselves. SDGs came out of the MDGs, where they said, okay, how do we solve people's problem in sustainable development? But did the nations put the money which was necessary to solve the problem? Not really. So without the cash, additional cash to put into the problem of SDGs, you're not going to solve the problem of SDGs. And during COVID, the SDGs really went behind. They fell behind because most of the indicators fell behind. That being said, most of the countries are focusing on the SDGs because they want to look good. And that helps, but that is not really at the level that we want to really see how it should be. Raghavan's point about why do not countries change? This is the same issue that I was talking about, the person who put the lime juice on his face so that he would be invisible to cameras. You go with the same attitude that you went to find solutions to solving other problems. So countries look at it from those point of views rather than a broader issue about how do we do to a collective good. Subhash points about UN importance going down. Yes, every president likes to come to the UN and give a great speech. Yes, because they think that they have arrived once they speak at the UN. But there is a lot happening on terms of discussions within the UN. There are hundreds of conferences going on every day at the UN to discuss how we should live in a better world. Do some of them go back and do this? Do the rich ones really influence how it is? Yes, they do. That said, the focus, and this is my last words, is that the focus should not be on making a great nation. The focus should be on making sure every person living in that country is living better. Prosperity for all the people in the nation, not just saying we are a great nation. And that's where the difference lies. Prosperity to all the nations of the world, not just saying we are a great world. With those words, let me open the discussions up and say, it's very rich, diverse. I may not have touched all the points, otherwise we will be here whole day. But the issue is that how do we make the world better so that we are be able to better too?
Well, let's give opening to the younger people first. So either Rahul or Nandini. Nandini, you had only questions. So this time, why don't we hear from you as to what you think?
Right, I agree with what Mathew said. Actually, when you said that the SDG goals, we are being set back, and the problem is that some countries are not putting in the money that is required, right? So, I mean, even if we look at it from the point that point, we shouldn't we also consider that there are some countries which are developing nations who are also participants in this discussion of the SDG, and they are still struggling within their own nation to make ends meet. So how would it be possible for them to kind of contribute the required funds for these goals? I think so. That would be another question that I had. I'm sorry for so many questions, but yeah, every time I hear the discussion like this goes like this, I have a lot of questions. So that's
TCA is saying he has to leave. Let's hear the last word from him before he goes.
Oh, well, I have to go because dinner waits.
Yeah, but
And
you can speak for 1 minute. I know it's hard to restrict yourself to 1 minute, but please, dinner can wait 1 minute. Let's hear from you.
the global cooperation problem really, as Mathew says, is that chaps bring their individual domestic styles to the international arena, and essentially, aggression is a huge problem. And if you want to make a point in a crowded kind of room, you need to be more aggressive than everybody else, and that's what we see happening everywhere. So how do you control that aggression? So you have, and that's been the objective throughout anyway. And the problem always through the centuries has been that, yes, everybody agrees we need to control this kind of aggression, and therefore we need to have some rules. The question becomes, who frames those rules? And if you have the kind of system that you have in not just the UN at least is more democratic, every country has a vote. But in IMF and World Bank, it's not like that. And you got to fix those problems. And lastly, I think the Security Council now is it's a complete, it's outlived its usefulness, because it's based on a very patronizing principles that there are 5 countries who know better than everybody else, and they can do whatever they want to, regardless of their muscle or whatever, political system or whatever. And the rest have to, and that they have the monopoly on the use of force. So I would say that if you want the UN to become more effective on some of the issues, at least, these security issues and stuff, the Security Council, there's no point in broadening it. It won't work. You just need to abolish the damn thing, so that this sense that there is a chosen few who will decide for the rest, that goes. So, like you said, we can go on the whole day or whole night. So, but I will take your leave now. Wonderful seeing you all. Subodh, I think we are meeting again on the 3rd.
Yes, we are.
And so, Bridge, of course, I meet quite often. So, see you guys.
Okay.
Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Rahul, your turn.
Yeah, yes. So, thing that Subhash Mathur sir mentioned was education. And I happen to have written an article on the same thing under the supervision of the chief economist at National Stock Exchange while I was interning there. So it goes by the name, Does Education Necessarily Guarantee a Decent Source of Livelihood? An attempt to unveil some harsh truths. So it is my ongoing research, and the data that I worked on showed that as of June 2023, there were 63.6 million graduates in the labor force out of 448 million people in the labor force in all education groups put together. Of the graduates in the labor force, 52.8 million people found employment, and the remaining 10.8 million were unemployed. This implies that around 83% of the graduates who entered the labor force were able to secure a job. The graduate employment rate stood at 51.5%. That is, only a little over half of the graduates of uh, India are employed. So I would partly blame globalization to be an instigator for this, but I have recognized 2 problems that occur. So we call it a double-edged knife. So there is white-collar deflation, which says that which refers to the condition where salaries and compensation for high-skilled professional jobs, such as those in the IT sector, have remained relatively stagnant or increased at a slower pace compared to other sectors. And the reasons being increased supply, global competition, but most importantly, technological disruption. So another key facet that we are taught in trade economics is technology, when it first gets introduced, acts as a substitute to trade, but gradually it converges into being a complement to trade. So even I feel the same way, and technological disruption will benefit this situation, I think, in near future. And then there's blue collar inflation, which refers to the situation where salaries for low-skilled or manual labor jobs, such as cab drivers, have experienced relatively higher growth rates compared to white-collar jobs. The reasons being increasing demand, skill mismatch, but most importantly, labor market dynamics. Now, the way our economy is built, the inequality that exists is not completely a result of globalization, right? There are there are limited legal protections. There is lack of union representation, which is due to the reason of which is due to political economic which is due to the flaws in political economics, to be precise, and that also in India. And so what we have figured out is this is a key problem, and UN does help India to solve this. It has specified sustainable development goals where education is a key goal, and India tries to achieve it. And there are several funds and forums which are initiated by UN that support it. So what India should do right now is target universal education for increased enrollment and conversion. It should establish community colleges, and most importantly, it should promote vocational and industrial training, including apprenticeships. So this is how we can tackle this problem, and I think it is indeed an important thing to discuss. So this is what I felt about this.
Okay, thank you, Rahul. Okay, it's open now. Anybody can talk if you want to talk. Otherwise, we can say that I'm not going to make any comments. Mathew and I have already had our say. So it's open now. And if there's no real further discussion, we can end it also. Bridge, anything to say?
Well, yes, I would just briefly mention one topic which Mathew touched upon and your brother also touched upon, which was climate change. And I don't like the way this discussion is going because the United States has been propagating the view that climate change is an international public good. I don't like the concept of international public good. I think climate change is a national public good. And it should be accepted as such by all nations who individually make an effort, and then you achieve something like an international public good. But if the US Treasury Secretary said, look, this is an international public good and we need private sector investment. So what all we need to solve the problem is a system of private sector investment guarantees, which of course, such guarantees would lead to distortions and not go quite the way you want to solve the problem. But I think kicking issues like climate change into the air, so this is something which has to be done at an international level, sure, but it has to be done at a national level. And say, the SDGs at least have the advantage of saying these are national goals also. But climate change somehow has not been internalized like that. So I'd just like to have Mathew's views on that. And why do we have a lot of highfalutin talk at the international level and so little at the national level? I agree with everyone that, look, this is a total disaster. You're probably going through a mass species extinction. It's an ecological disaster. It's happening before your eyes. And what global warming in particular will do to India is very, very frightening. But in terms of public debate at the national level, not just here, but throughout, I mean, there are climate change deniers in the US and the UK and Europe still. It is that countries have not pushed it as a national agenda at all. That is so worrying. And this highfalutin argument about international public good just rarefies it. It doesn't really lead to plans for national action. So I'd like to hear Mathew's views on that.
So go ahead.
Thank you. Subodh, can I?
Yeah, please.
Just let me come to Nandini's point on SDGs. The SDGs gave a goal for each of those countries. The first thing is that you as a country must make your own efforts to solve your problems. And the responsibility for managing your problems lies with your government and yourself. It's not the UN's responsibility. However, where the countries can come together to agree on these are the areas that we need to think about together is the UN gives a forum, and this is an intergovernmental forum. The rich countries can contribute, but it is your own responsibility to take care of yourself. That's how I see those issues. So the first is improve the quality of your public policy, make sure that there is adequate budget targeted towards those SDG goal areas so that you can make the change, and then also look for support internationally and learn from others as well. And the rich countries should actually contribute. On the issue of global public good and climate change, India was one of those who took a very strong and principled voice at the climate change discussion. The stance was common, good, but differentiated. Common but differentiated, that was the stand. We cannot, and the whole idea was, what India was said, you polluted, you rich countries polluted sufficiently to go rich. Why don't you allow us some of those time so that we can catch up to you, and we will need to pollute to catch up to you. So we can't go on to this. For example, India uses a lot of coal, and you cannot transfer from coal to other fuels all of a sudden without spending a lot of money. There's a lot of money involved in making those transfers and a lot of labor, etc. So they wanted the time to catch up so that they could develop, their citizens could develop. And that was a principled stand that India stands by even today. However, having said that, the issues with climate change, whether it is the sea level rising, whether it is the heat of the summer, or the pollutions that we are actually seeing in our cities, is felt by all. I mean, it's not just a US phenomena, and I tell some of my Scandinavian friends that soon the snow will disappear and you will be a wine growing this place. You'll be exporting wine, you know. So it's something that is felt by everyone. And today's conversation, we just basically start the chit chat with talking about pollution in Gurgaon. And the heat, the cold, extreme weather events are blowing. There are climate change deniers who will latch on to any conspiracy theory. But today we know that climate change is brought out by man-made issues. It's not because of other things. There could be other reasons, but basically most of the reason was because man made it, and man has the power, man and woman, let me put it to be politically correct. Men and women have the capacity to change it. And here the issue is that when we do have problems, how does our government policy relate with it and react to that? And that's the most important thing that we need to look out for. Doing nothing is not an answer. Everybody sees that. But that in a divided world, we are not able to come together to find solutions to that. There will be a lot of arguments about how exactly we should go about it. The rich countries do not want to give up their, level of prosperity. They don't want to sacrifice that. There has to be sacrifices made across the world. And who will sacrifice how much? A rich kid will pollute 1,000 times more than a poor kid in India. So who sacrifices more? How much? So these are difficult questions, and this cannot be solved by local solutions by alone. This has to be solved by global understanding. Thank you, Subodh. Over to you.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have a question.
Let
Mathew,
Subhash have the last word, okay? Because we have to end soon. So let's, we should defer
have
to
a
my
question.
brother and let him have the last word. Okay.
My question is India has a lot of coal. How long do you think it will take before India finishes that coal, irrespective of the pollution that it causes? Will it take 50 more years? Will it take 100 more years to finish the coal that we have? And of course, alongside we use other other energy sources. But how long do you think, in your opinion, it would take for India's coal deposits to finish, in the meanwhile, cause pollution problems?
Subodh, you are a better energy expert than me. So over to you, Subodh.
Okay. Well, first of all, India already imports coal. Okay. The power station in Gujarat, in Mundra, is importing Indonesian coal. Okay. Because Indonesian coal is better than Indian coal. So the question is also, what is the quality of the Indian coal? The quality of the Indian coal is poor enough that an international power, power generation in Gujarat is actually importing Indonesian coal. So the question is then, what are the sources of coal in the world that India can import from, not just its own coal? Because, even when you will do solar, which I'm pushing very hard, we are importing the panels. Okay, we don't yet have, and even though there's 25% duty, panels are still made in China. Nandini, we need the panels. We can boast about solar power generation in India, but what are you going to do? Make your own solar power generations? No, you cannot make. Even with 25% import duty, you are still, and that's been on since 2021, I think, you're still importing solar panels from China. So that part is there. But the coal is there for at least till 2070. So we have enough time to use it. But the quality of the coal is not right even for local pollution. So forget about global pollution. It is local pollution. When you have the coal mines in Bihar and Jharkhand, the local pollution from that is just is just too much. And then, the fly ash, by poor quality coal, I mean the fly ash that is generated from the power stations, that has often just sat on the roofs of the power station, and the roofs have collapsed. So local coal is a problem. Even if we don't run out of it, the quality is not that good. But that's our problem to tackle. Okay, and also the efficiency of the coal power stations in India is going up. That's worldwide. 30%. We used about 30% of the efficiency, with only 30% efficiency, meaning of all the energy that was in the coal, only 30% could be converted into electricity. Okay, so we burned so much coal, but only 30% of the energy that is, scientists tell us, is in the coal, only 30% of that went into making electricity. Today, I think the new coal power plants in India are at 50%. So we can use the same coal much more efficiently, and there are some theoretical limits. I mean, you are never going to get 100%. Okay, this is not an idea. Maybe it's like 60% or something like that. Then we could extend the coal for quite some time if we use it more efficiently, and we keep importing. And of course, South Africa also has plenty of coal. So I think the source of import is also there. And so it's really not, I think it's a good question to ask how long the coal will be, but I think India can continue for coal use for quite many decades, using the coal better that we have and importing coal from countries that have no shortage of coal. I think that question, that's my answer as somebody who does look at these problems quite often, that coal is not something that we are going to run out of. We can use coal. Yeah, we can use coal. Okay, let's end it here. Let me say that it's a great experiment, and it seems to be working rather well. I am trying to create a new format in which we democratize opinions. Okay, we don't just leave it to the elite. We don't have professors just talking to other professors. We want to democratize it, so that includes young people, and it includes people who may not be experts on the topic, but are generally smart and well-informed. So Mathew, I tried to put together not an expert panel. I tried to put together what you can call as a Janta panel, a people's panel, including young people. One of them certainly didn't prepare, Shubhangi, so she decided to drop out. That's okay. Young people in India, I find, are much more busy than we ever were. They have so many things that they are doing that it's hard to pin them down to say, look, here's an assignment. You please listen to Mathew, prepare your remarks and come. That's almost like giving an open book exam to them. It's hard to find time. But I thank you all. And Mathew, I thank you especially for being so kind to give your time twice. And it has been a great pleasure of mine to listen to everybody. So thank you, all of you. And maybe we'll meet in another forum at some point. Okay. Bye, everybody. Let's end the recording. Let's end the recording and then we can just talk informally if we want to. Okay. So, all right.
I have to.